December 1944. A frozen defensive position near Bastogne, Belgium. A biting wind cuts through shattered pine trees where American soldiers huddle inside shallow foxholes. They do not move, they do not speak, and they do not close their eyes. For 72 continuous hours, these men have endured unrelenting combat without a single second of sleep. The human mind is breaking under the weight of sheer exhaustion, transforming the snow-covered forest into a landscape of waking nightmares. A private screams at empty air, insisting he sees massive German tanks crashing through the brush. Nearby, a veteran sergeant gently speaks to a frozen oak tree, convinced it is his platoon commander giving orders. Men fall dead asleep while standing upright, their fingers frozen to their rifle triggers. This company is collapsing from within, weaponless against a psychological breaking point. General George S. Patton will answer this invisible crisis with a harsh, unyielding rotation of forced rest that leaves himself as the final guard. This is the story of how a single Lakota first sergeant saved his hallucinating company from destruction by outlasting the brutal cold and sleep deprivation during the Battle of the Bulge. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We tell the World War II stories that show what happens when the plan dies and the soldiers don't. First Sergeant Robert Standing Bear was a 31-year-old Oglala Lakota from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota, serving with an infantry company in the 3rd Army. Before the war, he had learned the discipline of patience and endurance from his elders, skills that became matters of survival when he traded the plains of his youth for the battlefields of Europe. He had seen the worst of the winter campaign, watching friends fall to artillery and frostbite, yet he remained the steady backbone of his unit. His men trusted his quiet competence, knowing he never panicked under fire and never asked a soldier to endure what he would not face himself. Now, he stood in the freezing mud, watching his broken company slip into madness after 3 days of relentless pressure. The enemy they faced was not just the German army, but sleep deprivation, a silent antagonist that turned disciplined combat infantrymen into hollow ghosts of themselves. 72 hours without rest had weaponized time and temperature against the unit, eroding the human mind until reality completely dissolved. This invisible adversary stripped away memory, judgment, and basic perception, replacing the snowy landscape with terrifying illusions that no bullet could stop. It was a merciless force that thrived in the sub-zero temperatures, slowly freezing the blood and shutting down the brains of 120 American soldiers. The physical torment of the bitter cold, combined with the psychological weight of constant alertness, had broken the men down to their absolute limits. The hostile environment demanded a total collapse of their defensive front, presenting a threat far more insidious than a direct frontal assault. First Sergeant Standing Bear could see the mental decay spreading through his foxholes, threatening to destroy the company before the Germans even launched their dawn attack. It was December 1944, and the Ardennes offensive had thrown the entire Allied front into absolute chaos. The unexpected German breakthrough had shattered communication lines, split American divisions, and forced isolated units into desperate defensive struggles across Belgium. Supply networks were completely broken, leaving frontline troops without winter clothing, adequate ammunition, or rations. Heavy snow blankets and dense fog grounded Allied aircraft, stripping the defenders of their critical air support while temperatures plummeted well below zero. In this frozen terrain, the normal rules of organized warfare rapidly fell apart as small groups of men were left to hold critical crossroads entirely on their own. Military doctrine was abandoned out of sheer necessity as commanders scrambled to plug widening gaps in the line with whatever manpower remained. In previous engagements, many higher-ranking officers had routinely overlooked the early signs of battle fatigue, assuming men could simply push through the exhaustion. Soldiers who complained of blurred vision or mental cloudiness were often told to harden their resolve and keep firing. This systematic neglect allowed a psychological crisis to quietly fester along the perimeter, transforming weary regiments into ticking time bombs. Without proper relief schedules or warm staging areas, frontline units were pushed past the limits of human endurance, Entire platoons were left in active combat zones for days on end, their leaders mistaking sheer panic for battle-ready adrenaline. The breakdown of command awareness meant that the creeping threat of sleep deprivation psychosis was treated as a secondary concern, far behind ammunition counts and physical casualties. Now that neglect had culminated in a frozen pocket of woods near Bastogne, where an entire company of 120 men was left completely exposed to the elements and their own decaying minds. Captain Thomas Vance, the 34-year-old company commander from Columbus, Ohio, walked into the makeshift aid station, set up inside a bombed-out stone barn. He found Captain James Keller, the 36-year-old battalion medical officer from Philadelphia, writing notes on a wooden crate. Keller looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly from the cold. Vance sat down on a broken bench. "The men are losing their minds, Keller." Keller set his pen down on the crate. "I just saw the reports from the line, Thomas. They are seeing things that are not there," Vance said. "It is sleep deprivation psychosis," Keller said. "A private swore he saw a tank made of glass," Vance said. "Their brains are misfiring from lack of sleep," Keller said. "A sergeant was trying to eat a frozen branch," Vance said. "They are starved for rest," Keller said. "We have to keep them in the foxholes," Vance said. "If they do not sleep, they will break permanently," Keller said. "The Germans are going to hit us at dawn," Vance said. "You are commanding ghosts, Thomas," Keller said. "I have no fresh troops to replace them," Vance said. "They cannot hold a rifle straight," Keller said. "They will hold because they have to," Vance said. "They will shoot each other in the dark," Keller said. "I need medical clearance to keep them active," Vance said. "I cannot give you that clearance, Thomas." Keller said. "It is an operational necessity." Vance said. "It is medical madness." Keller said. "We lose the ridge if they drop asleep," Vance said. "They are already dropping," Keller said. "Give them chemical stimulants," Vance said. "Their hearts will fail in this cold," Keller said. "That is a risk I must take," Vance said. "I am the medical authority here," Keller said. "And I am the tactical commander," Vance said. "I will file a formal protest with Division," Keller said. "We will be dead before Division reads it," Vance said. "I will not assist in killing our own men." Keller said. "Then I will handle the line myself," Vance said. "You are going to lose the whole company," Keller said. "I am going to save this position," Vance said. Keller picked up his field telephone. "I am calling headquarters." Vance grabbed the receiver. "Do not do that." Keller pulled the phone away. "This is above our level now." The report reached Patton within the hour. Patton arrived within the hour. His open-top Jeep pulled up to the stone barn, kicking up frozen gravel as it stopped. The general stepped out into the biting wind, his winter coat thrown open to reveal the 4 polished stars glittering on his collar and the ivory-handled revolvers secured at his waist. He walked inside the dark aid station with a slow, deliberate stride that made every officer and medic instantly snap to attention. The room grew completely silent, save for the whistling wind outside. Patton did not raise his voice, but his cold presence filled the entire damp space as he looked at the 2 captains. "What is the breakdown on this ridge, Captain Vance?" "The men have reached 72 hours without sleep, sir," Vance said. "And your assessment of their capability?" 30% are functional, 40% are impaired, and 30% are nearly catatonic, sir." "Have you implemented a defensive rotation?" "I have no fresh units to rotate into the line." General Patton looked toward the dark corner where several shivering soldiers lay curled on the dirt floor. "An infantry company does not die from being tired, Captain. It dies when its leadership forgets how to manage human endurance. You have allowed tactical panic to replace basic discipline, and you have treated your own men as if they were expendable machinery rather than soldiers. A true commander does not simply watch his line rot from within while waiting for a relief column that is fighting its own battle miles away. You have a choice before you right now. You will either step aside and let a real leader restore order to this position, or you will be relieved of your command for incompetence before the first German shell hits this ridge at dawn. First Sergeant Standing Bear will take operational control of the line immediately. He will organize a strict 3-shift rotation where 1/3 of the company sleeps for 2 hours, while the remaining 2/3 hold the perimeter. The most functional men will be placed on the heavy machine guns and primary observation posts, while the deeply impaired men will be moved into the protected reverse-slope dugouts to get their mandatory rest first. Every non-commissioned officer will move through the trenches every 30 minutes to physically shake men awake and force them to recite their name, rank, and hometown to fight off the hallucinations. We will not abandon this high ground, and we will not let these men slip into permanent psychosis because their officers failed to manage the clock. Captain Vance sat down silently, completely broken by the general's unyielding gaze, and nodded his compliance. First Sergeant Standing Bear took immediate operational control of the line as the freezing darkness deepened. He walked the perimeter every 30 minutes, his boots crunching loudly in the frozen crust of snow as he moved from one ice-rimmed foxhole to the next. He grabbed shivering men by their heavy wool jackets, shaking them vigorously until their glazed eyes focused through the gloom. He forced each soldier to look him directly in the face and clearly state their name, rank, and distant American hometown. The men spoke with slow, thick tongues, wrestling against the heavy fog of sleep deprivation psychosis to pull reality back into their minds. Henderson from Topeka stayed awake for 20 more minutes before slipping back into a deep, dreamless sleep inside the protected reverse-slope dugout. The desperate rotation pattern grinded forward in 2-hour blocks through the bitter, freezing night. At exactly 05:30, a sudden burst of small arms fire shattered the frozen silence as a German probe crashed into the perimeter. The 2/3 of the company currently holding the line opened up with a ragged, slow response, their stiff fingers fumbling with icy bolts and heavy triggers. The defensive fire was uncoordinated and disjointed, but the heavy machine guns, held in place by the most functional men, kept the enemy infantry from breaching the main line. The ragged defensive front held its ground against the probing assault, refusing to buckle in the dark. At 0700, a fresh relief column finally marched into the position, allowing the exhausted survivors to drop their weapons. 120 men collapsed directly into the snow where they stood, half of them completely asleep before their heavy bodies even hit the frozen earth. First Sergeant Robert Standing Bear went home to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. After the final surrender in Europe, he returned quietly to the plains, refusing to look at himself as a hero, though the men he saved never forgot his name or his face. He spent the rest of his life working the land and teaching the traditional ways of his people to a younger generation that had never seen a frozen trench. The severe frostbite he endured during those 72 hours left him with a permanent, heavy limp that reminded him of the Belgian winter every time the weather turned cold. He lived a long and peaceful life surrounded by his family, passing away quietly in 1984. Captain Thomas Vance faced a cold and formal inquiry regarding his command decisions on that frozen ridge near Bastogne. The tactical records showed he was passed over for any further major promotions, his career effectively stalled by the official report tucked away in division files. He left the United States Army shortly after the occupation duties concluded, returning to Columbus, Ohio, to live a secluded and bitter life. He rarely spoke about the war to his neighbors, and completely avoided any military reunions or veteran gatherings until his death in 1976. General George S. Patton never mentioned the isolated incident in any of his public speeches or interviews, keeping the medical crisis out of the popular press. He kept the original company morning report inside a locked drawer in his personal field desk until his sudden death in December 1945. He wrote a single sentence in a private letter to his wife just days after the relief column arrived at the position. He noted that an army can survive a shortage of bread or bullets, but it cannot survive a commander who surrenders his common sense to the dark. Some historians have argued that General Patton's heavy reliance on an indigenous, non-commissioned officer to reorganize a failing frontline defensive position broke the established chain of military command during a fluid crisis. They claim that bypassing commissioned officers risked destroying local unit authority during a critical defensive stand. Others have argued the opposite, insisting that traditional bureaucratic structures are useless when frontline leadership succumbs to tactical panic and collective psychological collapse. They maintain that Patton's radical intervention was a brilliant calibration of human endurance that prevented an absolute breakthrough. What is certain is that a disciplined Lakota sergeant successfully kept 120 hallucinating men alive and fighting when their positions were completely frozen. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have left the local commissioned officers in control, or would you have bypassed the chain of command to save the company? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about what happens when the plan dies and the soldiers don't, make sure to subscribe.